2018, the New Zealand Labour government introduced the Child Poverty Reduction Act of 2018 to halve child poverty by 2028. What we know from most recent statistics is that, over the last 2 to 4 years, income poverty rates for children have remained largely the same. So, if we look at children in 2022, approximately 328,000 children were living in income poverty, using an inclusive measure of the family income being about 60% of median income in New Zealand. And we know that poverty has huge impacts on child health. So the most recent the most recent Cure Kids State of Child Health report showed that bronchiectasis, which is permanent damage to your lungs from recurrent chest infections, is 6 times as high for your low socioeconomic families compared with high socioeconomic families. And you are twice as likely to need hospitalisation if you're from a low socioeconomic position family than if you're from a high socioeconomic position family. So we know that poverty causes illness, and poverty really kills people as well. On this episode, I'm bringing on Bernie Harfleet, who is one of the masterminds behind Give a Kid a Blanket, which is a charity organisation based in the Auckland area that helps families with some of these material needs that they are going without, things like giving kids blankets, clothes, toys, as well as food and just general support for families as well. So I'm really excited to bring Bernie on this episode. Thank you so much for coming, and I'd really like to hear about where did Give a Kid a Blanket come from?
Thanks, Nina. Great to be here. Interesting to hear those statistics. And yes, we started Give a Kid a Blanket. And when I say we, it's my partner Turtle and I. We're both artists, and it's actually come out of a social art practice. So even though now it's a registered charity and working every day, it's also a living artwork. Social artwork aims to instead make things for a viewer, instead bring that viewer in on the work, make them part of the work, and together work on social change. But how Give a Kid a Blanket started was in response to a coroner's report that said a child had died in part because of the cold and damp housing the family were in. It wasn't a Labour government at that time, but I don't think who was in power really matters too much. It was, though, a government home. It wasn't sort of a private landlord or anything. No installation, and that child died. And so we thought, right, we can do something practically about this. I come from a background of working with kids with special needs, special ed background. So we knew about public health nurses. So we thought a way to go forward would be to simply set up a Facebook page, which was reasonably new when we started this in 2015, ask our friends to give us blankets, and we'd get them to families in need through public health nurses. We always thought that working through professionals was the way to go, because they would have clients immediately in need, and public health nurses often pick up people that fall through the gaps because they pick them up through kids, through schools, obviously about schools and teachers being vigilant and noticing change in kids, or noticing kids that haven't got lunch, things like that. So we set it up, Facebook page, Give a Kid a Blanket, give us your blankets. Woke up the next day and 500 people had jumped on board already, which doesn't sound much these days with social media taking off, but back then it was wow. So we ended up, it was a winter-only project back in those days. We ended up with, I think, 22 strangers offering to be drop-off points in their place. We were just doing it at home. And so people could have the ability to look at a Facebook page, look at their area, say Mount Eden, see the name of someone, just a first name and phone number, get hold of them, drop their donation to them, and then I'd do a wide circle of Auckland, pick those up, get them out through public health nurses, other social workers, through agencies we latched onto, and got them to kids in need. Well, not just kids, actually. I mean, the thing is, if there's hungry kids, there's hungrier parents usually. If there's cold kids, there's usually colder parents, because most parents will go without so their kids have something. So we target the whole family, and we target them very generously with good, new or excellent quality pre-loved resources, so they're going to last a long time. We aim to give things with a message that is clear that these people are valued. because these people are not they and us, they are us. Anyone's circumstance can change. So while we're focusing at the beginning here on poverty, the people we work with now through police and other agencies might not be in poverty. Their circumstances might have changed through family harm, recently through flooding and cyclone damage, because of COVID, through redundancies. So there's many, many factors that mean people need to be given some support, but
I think it's
with dignity.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to recognise, like you say, that not all poverty is this idea of a chronic poverty, this person's just been like this or this family's been like this for ages. Is that it's recognition that actually anyone can fall on hard times, and, we need to live in a society where we actually do have some form of safety net, so that if you do fall on hard times, that you do actually have a chance to pick yourself back up, or you've got a community around you that will help pick you up, and I feel like increasingly it's harder and harder for people to do this. Do you agree? Or, what's your feeling?
I think some people's poverty isn't necessarily about money. It might be lack of family, lack of community. And so for those people, if they're displaced or moved, for instance, sometimes the police might move somebody because it's not safe in their region, or they're New Zealanders from another country that have come here. To me, that's a poverty too.
And I think it's really interesting, the model that you've got with Give a Kid a Blanket. So, how I ended up bringing you on this podcast was actually through my very good friend who's also a police officer. And she told me about what you were doing and your story, and how she's like, yes, we should get Bernie on the podcast. And I said, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting that with Give a Kid a Blanket, you guys sort of only work with professional groups or, people referring to your services, rather than, I guess, like almost like a direct consumer kind of charity. Why is it that you guys choose to go through like professional groups rather than direct to the people who need this help?
I think firstly that going through the professional groups supports people, say for the police as an example, that are absolutely in need and in crisis right then, and have things happening in their life that are the level that the police have to be involved. And the public health nurses, again, these are people that are detecting need through the kids at school. The kids are the sort of channel into them often. And so they're people that would fall between the gaps. And while there's lots of people that could happily come directly to us, and we do get asked, there's plenty of people that could take advantage of that too. And I don't want to be a person that has to choose between who should and should not have. And also another part of the picture is that the people that we give to through those services remain anonymous to us. I think a lot of charities unwittingly end up making their clients victimised.
How so?
By highlighting them in their advertising campaigns. Poor Nina. Nina's going blind and needs your help. Rather than, hey, we've got people out there that have vision impairment, how about giving us some money to help them? I don't think that people are stupid, and they do know that there's plenty of people in the community that need some support, and I don't need to throw people in front of them and in front of a camera and show them little Johnny looking hungry to demonstrate there's hungry kids out there.
That's interesting. It's kind of like side note, not really related to this, but I remember reading about something or watching this video, and it was talking about, when you have those advertisements and stuff with, like you say, like a hungry child or whatever. And, if you show a bunch of people like an ad with one child, and then you show another bunch of people an ad with two children, it's interesting that most people will give more to the ad that had like one child, because people for some reason are more able to have like an emotional connection when it's just one person suffering. I don't know if it's because people feel like with one person they have a greater ability to make change for that one person. But then when you have, like a tragedy, a crisis with multiple people who are affected, thousands or something, people don't necessarily have that same emotional connection to helping those people in need. Like, how are you finding it with getting help for, give a kid a blanket?
Generally, we've always managed to get enough resources in to get it out. This winter, which is we work year round, but winter was our biggest campaign of the year each year. We did get enough resources in, but far less donations of excellent quality pre-loved.
Right.
So to be clear, we want new items or excellent quality pre-loved, because things have to have that message that people are cared about.
I think it's a dignity thing as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this year, far less quality pre-loved. Didn't get rubbish, but just less quality. And I think that's partly because people gave because of the flooding, certainly in our area in the west, the cyclone damage generally.
And what was that like for Give a Kid a Blanket during those times?
It got seriously busier than normal. But, lots of other agencies were stepping up too. And we're an agency, we're a charity that receives no government funding. So there's plenty, I shouldn't say that. We did end up getting some money out of MSD, but our daily bread and butter has nothing to do with any government funding. And there are lots of other agencies that are funded, and we're, of course, the first ones that needed to step up. So again, we kept working as we normally would through police and public health nurses and the social workers, and just kept giving out through their requesting mainly.
And, with the big January anniversary floods, now, is there still many people who are needing help because
absolutely,
of that?
Because that, I can only reflect on the winter we've just had. May, June this year, we did our winter campaign. Past it's been June, July, but we thought we'd start earlier to get it out in the communities before that real cold set in. I think we helped, I just note the number of people now, 3,500 over that 2-month period, and just over 1,000 were noted as being either cyclone or flood affected. So the first response, to my mind, was quick, but very much a band-aid. Now those people have been getting back into more permanent housing, and while they've now got a roof over their head, they haven't got resources within the home. So now they're needing bedding. We don't do furniture, but furniture and things like that.
Mm. And I want to ask you a little bit more about the concept of social art. What is social art?
The idea of social art is that instead of sort of an us and them with an artist's artwork and an audience, that instead you invite the audience to be part of the work. And together you can highlight and hopefully make some social change. So apart from Give a Kid a Blanket, which is a pretty strong example of our practice and has been a living artwork since 2015, would be a work we did as part of Parking Day down in Wellington. A Parking Day is a one-day event run by the council and the Wellington Sculpture Trust, where now it's only in Cuba Street, but it was in a number of parks around Wellington, where they handed over car park spaces to artists and installers to make a statement or do what they wanted to do on the day. We did one called Coffee in a Blanket. We'd found out the Wellington soup kitchen was desperately in need of blankets, but also coffee. You can imagine how much coffee those guys go through. So we went down, and we had a car park space that was directly opposite Wellington train station. Turned out to be in front of the main IRD building of New Zealand and with eyesight of Parliament. Because we come down from West Auckland, we were sort of working on the fly in terms of not wanting to take too much stuff down. So what we did was we put cardboard down in the car park on the floor, which a number of homeless people would use to sleep on during the day. And we got some cardboard and basically gave people the opportunity to sit with their own little sign and see how that felt to just sit with a sign. We had a sign that said coffee and a blanket. we had made contact with people before and let them know we were coming, and we ended up with 6 months' supply of coffee and blankets. But the people that sat down with their signs suddenly saw how the world could change as soon as you sat down. We were there from 8 in the morning till 6 at night, so we had the 2 big commuter runs in and out of that train station. First guy that sat down, I think his sign said something like, "We all need some kindness," or something similar. It turned out to be a software developer for IRD.
So you had these random people.
These people came out of that train station, and as soon as they saw him, well-dressed guy, they just made like salmon up the river and did this big U-ey and just wouldn't look at him. Lady came along next, very well-dressed business lady, and I explained that it could be a bit upsetting because she might find people ignore her.
So you had these like regular people
just
sit
came
down
and had a turn
to see what it was like to be essentially homeless begging on the street as a
just
social
there with a
experiment
sign,
kind
just
of
there
thing.
with a sign, just be part of it.
Yeah.
And and she said, "Oh no, don't worry, they'll." And she was crying after the end of 10 minutes because actually everyone ignored her or looked at her with disdain. All these people's signs, they said something affirming, life affirming, but just to be on the other side for a bit. So we had people that missed their buses and trains because they wanted to go away and find coffee or a blanket for us. But that sort of thing.
Why do you think that sort of experience speaks more into people's hearts than just seeing somebody sitting on the side of the road with a sign saying coffee?
Because they've experienced it. We did a big work called Max and Bella and Friends at New Zealand Sculpture on Shore. It was a work about anxiety and depression. So 200,000 adults have anxiety and depression each month in New Zealand. And the work was made up of 10,000 white windmills. They were in a circle that was 24 metres wide, and you could walk through it in paths. Now, all the people that came to that in the conversations we had about mental health and depression and anxiety, that number will resonate with them so much more than a newsreader simply, or someone listening to this podcast, simply me saying it. It will be forgotten. But being amongst those windmills, being there in Wellington with that sign, bringing a blanket in, volunteering, being part of something that's actually action towards social change, I think is far more powerful.
Do you think people have forgotten what social change means and what, social activism means?
Well, I think there's a lot of people, particularly through social media, want to tell them what it is. So it's important that they hang on to their own definitions rather than necessarily those made up by other people. So it's easier not to get out of your house and do things anymore.
So I think one of the reasons why I did this podcast, Revolving Door Syndrome, is because I wanted to connect with people who either are doing the work or have experienced these systems, because I feel like it's really easy for me to make my own opinion about, what's going on in New Zealand and why we've got, so many problems in our healthcare system. But I find it really hard to explain it to people who haven't seen it. I find it really, really hard. And, I've recently just seen the play called Things That Matter. And it's a play based on a memoir written by Dr. David Geller, who's an intensive care doctor in Middlemore Hospital. And I walked away from it thinking, oh my gosh, this is just a beautiful, piece of art. It's almost like social art in itself, the way that the play took David Geller's experiences and the patient stories about how tough it is being a healthcare worker, but also how tough it is to be these patients or these families of the patients. And I thought this is probably one of the best ways of actually conveying how important this healthcare crisis is. And I think I really applaud you, because I think having that social art means that you can convey these ideas in a way that will speak to people from the heart rather than just, another statistic or another news article.
Yeah, I think showing them something. I mean, I sort of get that it's, for some people, hard to wrap their heads around it, and that's okay. That's okay. I mean, for me, because I say it's art, but it's something we're passionate about, and I guess I don't want to lose sight that we're so deeply into Give a Kid a Blanket that sometimes it's good just to put your head above the water a little bit and remind yourself it's still part of your art practice, because we're at the moment working on a piece for New Zealand Sculpture on Shore. We've traditionally been in that show every couple of years. It is biennial. It raises money for Women's Refuge in New Zealand, so the things we like to talk about are either directly about their work or the concerns. We've done a lot of work on child abuse and abuse to women. The anxiety and depression piece was there. We've done work there about kids going to school hungry. All those things. So we've got a commission from them to represent them. But otherwise, sometimes it can feel crikey, we don't get a chance to do our art practice. So it's good to remind myself that we're just living it as a living artwork all the time.
I was really interested in talking to you about the Women's Refuge piece that you did a couple of years ago with the maze. If you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, yeah, we've done a number of different works, both individually and then basically my partner Turtle and I were out of the same house, so budgets all come out of the same house. So we work well together, although we're good at different things, so that seems to be complementary. The last big thing we did for them was a maze. It was made out of cargo pallets, like the pallets you sort of see around the street, and good firewood. And I think it had, from memory, about 586 pallets in it. It was a piece that was 30 metres long by about 26 metres. If you're a bird and were able to fly, although we did stick the photo on the entrances to the maze, you ended up walking through the word refuge. There were 2 entrance and exits, so with oncoming visitors either way, you ended up hitting spots where you had to share space and take space or give space to oncoming traffic. It was about 26 centimetres wide, I think, with inside that font. The idea with that was to echo what those women are doing every day, about negotiating space, keeping themselves safe as possible.
And having to do that with strangers as well.
Absolutely. And the work was called Why Don't You Just Leave? And that is probably the main question Anne Jury, who is the boss of Women's Refuge, would get asked all the time. The reality is women take statistically 7 times to leave before they can get out, for numerous reasons, no doubt. But I think people that are lucky enough not to have been in an abusive situation just think you grab a bag, pop out the door and it's over. But
well, why do you think people think that? Why do you think people think, oh, these women should just leave? Why can't they just leave? You know, why do people think that?
Well, I think it's because they haven't been in that situation, so they think it's a simple solution.
And why isn't it so simple for these women?
I think it's an individual question for each woman. I think there's so many reasons. Keeping the kids safe sometimes might seem safe still in that violent place. It might not be a violent place. It might be a mentally abusive place, which is far harder in terms of to go and show a doctor some broken ribs and a black eye over just this person's in my head and it's breaking me.
I think what people don't realise is that a lot of people who end up in this situation, they don't end up there overnight. It's usually, you know, something that happens over long periods of time. You know, you don't end up in an abusive relationship straight away. Usually that things take time, and you know you build it, like you say, we build like an attachment to this person, and you know for many different reasons, you know, whether it's financial or children or you're still in love with this person. It's too hard and too complicated for us to just ask them why don't you leave. You know, I think it's a really powerful title that you gave that.
I think it's and for some people it's their normal. It's the normal they've experienced as children. That's the relationship they've seen between their parents. And they've gone on to have the same relationship as their parents.
And I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background and you and Turtle's background and why you guys have, embarked on this social art sort of trajectory. Because, there's lots of artists in the world, some of them making more money doing different types of art. But why is it that you guys have embarked on social art and trying to make social change?
Yeah. Because we've made zero money. And I filled in the form last night for Sculpture on Shore. It said, where are people that are likely to see your work apart from at Sculpture on Shore? And honestly, apart from there's some stuff in little private collections, there's some external stuff in Waitakere, which is a sculpture arboretum out of Waikato, but the real answer is probably locked up in storage, because that's what happens, Why? I can't really tell her story for her, but certainly we both have known different aspects of life growing up. We're both adopted, and I think that is the place we ended up connecting on as adults and getting together. That gives you a huge understanding of the other person. I think there's some... and there'll be adopted people listening to this completely disagree with me, I've got to say, but my feeling is there's some very common stuff about loss of family when you're adopted. When I strip it down, I feel like we're just animals, and adoption or removal from your family that nature intended you to be with is very traumatic.
Can I ask, how old were you when you were adopted, when you were taken from your birth family?
Oh, I was taken from my birth mother, I think about 2 seconds out of the womb.
Right.
And then I had a hernia of the umbilical cord, so it took a month for me to be adopted.
Were you adopted into the same family that you lived with your whole childhood, or did you have to experience being moved around a lot as a child?
No, okay. So I think these are the things that inform me where I get to my social art practice, and for both of us too. So no, I was adopted into the same family I grew up in. No other siblings, just a mum and dad, and parents that were my peers' grandparents' generation. So I think I was adopted in 1964, and often couples, I think, waited and tried to have children well into their 40s and then ended up adopting. And I think for many, we were in some way a band-aid on infertility, because even though they now had a child, infertility was still a issue. And so I'm not sure my parents could ever hear it when they said, because we couldn't have a child of our own. But if you analyse that statement, it sort of is about having a child of their own, which you clearly are not.
Is that what you felt like when you were growing up?
No, when I was growing up, when I was young, you're surrounded by this wonderful myth, in a way. Although I've got to say I was always told I was adopted, but you're told what their version of adopted was. So you're lucky and your parents did the right thing. And I mean, my parents had this great story about my mother being, young, and she was the school dux, and so they thought she should go on to do wonderful things, and a child would hold her back, and how the birth father was a musician, and which it turned out to be all absolute bullshit. It was just stuff when I got my birth records, I thought it said on a girl of average intelligence. Was only
That's
comment.
Interesting that would be put in the birth record at all.
That was kind compared to some of the birth records. For a while there, we helped, for 10 years, run an adoption support group for adults that we started in. And I started with some friends in Ponsonby, and I think some people had comments like "young sluttish girl" and things like that.
Oh my goodness!
Oh, dreadful
the
things.
60s.
Dreadful
Wow.
things were written about these young women. And like for me, if I've got any anger at all towards birth family, it would be to my grandparents, because they had children obviously of their own, and yet they still encouraged my birth mother to go off to Auckland and have the baby and sayonara sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when I first left school, I was in a film crew for a couple of years, in a contract film crew, and we did the news a lot. So I was very exposed to every day was different, and I was very much the lowest person on the ladder, but got to meet prime ministers and Desmond Tutu and people like that, and then also like prostitutes that have been held up with their boyfriend in a batch while the police surrounded them, and people living in poverty. So within a 2-year period, I got to see a real kaleidoscope of what community was. And then after a brief time as a storeman, while I was waiting to find my feet, ended up naturally just progressing to working with kids with intellectual disabilities. And I've worked with kids and adults for 35 years now with disabilities, intellectual disabilities. And as part of that, of course, I've worked with kids that were not disabled in any way when they were born, but were harmed. And I think that's the thing, we're very aware. We have high statistics in New Zealand of kids killed, 1 every 5 years. 5 weeks.
That's crazy. 1 every 5 weeks.
Every year. 14 women killed every year in domestic violence. And while those statistics are frightening, what I reflect on really is how many people are just living in hell. And those are the ones that we've come to talk about with our art.
Yeah, I mean, like in my practice as a paediatric and emergency doctor, I've seen some of the worst, worst cases of inflicted abuse on children. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Me as one person, I've seen, quite a few cases of child abuse, like really significant kinds of child abuse. But again, that's just the ones that make it to the hospital. I'm sure that there's a lot that's maybe not so intense, but is chronic and damaging and will have lasting effects well into adulthood, and may never recover from if we don't give these people the help that they need. And I think that the whole child protection and state care is really an interesting topic for me, because how do you draw a balance of keeping children with the families, their biological families, versus making sure that they're in a safe place, somewhere that's not in these unsafe households, that we've decided that they're unsafe, basically. And how do we draw that line, and how do we make sure that these kids are in a safe place? What do you think, based on sort of your experiences? And
well, I think that you always have to be children first. So they're the ones that really can't speak up for themselves from infants right through. But if you're going to remove people from houses and families, you've got to put the work into trying to see what the issues are for the families and trying to help them change themselves. I think just a cut-off of nothingness is no good for anyone.
I think we were talking before about, before we started this recording, about your story with adoption, and that you didn't really get any follow-up once you'd been adopted out, really, apart from a few plunket visits here and there. Is that right?
Yeah, I think for all adopted people, really, that to me it's a government placement. And so there should be follow-up right up until you're 18, I believe. And of course, there gets to be a point when actually adults can come and talk to kids. You're not always little. To the best of my knowledge, and certainly my partner's knowledge, some plunket visits was it. And it's not good enough.
Yeah, so I was recently at the campaign launch for Whakarongo Mai Voice, which is for rangatahi and children in state care, trying to give them, the ability to advocate for themselves through this non-government agency. And it was quite shocking to hear that some children who are in state care, so not even ones that are adopted, ones who are in state care in a foster family, or several have been shipped around to several foster families, might only get seen by a social worker once a year. And you just got to question, we talk about the royal state and the Royal Inquiry into State Care,
Yes.
right? And we talk about these historic abuse that has happened in the 60s and 70s for people who are in state care. And we talk about it like it was like history, like it was that happened back then. But that was a different time. But I think if we're continuing to have this system where we don't engage the young people who are in state care and we don't ask them what's going on and don't give them the ability to feel like they have a voice over decisions that are being made about them, about where they're going, about who they're going to be staying with, we're going to lead to that same problem again, aren't we? Of, these children not having a voice and these children being in really vulnerable situations with adults who are making decisions for them and perhaps doing things to them or for them that they didn't ask for.
Mm. Yeah, and that's why it's really important. We've got to listen to the adults that are now speaking out, because while we would hope that kids would feel like they could tell us, talk to us, if we're returning them to a place that is unsafe, maybe they'd be too scared to. I mean, if you were going to disclose abuse, you'd have to be confident that you weren't going to be said, thank you very much, and see you later, and be sent back there.
Yeah.
Because you might feel like you'd be in more danger.
Yeah.
It's a tough one to... I guess I'd hope that if a child disclosed abuse, that then they were immediately removed from anywhere.
Yeah. It's really hard, really hard. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm just, I'm worried that it's really hard to know whether keeping children in the families and supporting the families is better, or taking them and putting them in other families. Anyway, this is a very hard topic. I mean, what have you learned from talking with other adults similar to you who've also experienced being in state care or being adopted?
Oh, I think, there's some general stuff around... I think when you have, not necessarily in the front of your brain, but always in the back, had that rejection at birth, which is really, as I say, being removed from everything that should be glued to you as a small person, then it's hard to shake off that you're not worthy of things. So that, and I know lots of people have it, but that imposter syndrome, that surprise that people do like you, do find you worthy of things, still catches me. Because it's a really big message. And I think you'd find if you looked at, and I don't know this off the top of my heart, but statistics of people in prison, people in drug and alcohol programs, you'd find that if you said, put your hand up if you're adopted or have not grown up with your family, many would. Certainly, I remember one guy, when he finally connected with his a brother, they'd been separated at birth. The brother had spent a lot of time in jail, now went back and worked with other prisoners. But what brought him around was realising how many of his prison peers were adopted or had grown up in state care. Another guy was at drug and alcohol. I think there was 7 in the room. Adoption came up, 5 of them were adopted, which was a really eye-opening experience for him.
I think we have to understand that if we want to tackle the issues of crime and the prison population and what have you, we have to be looking, on ourselves, looking in the mirror of, what are we doing to these young people and these children by putting them in state care and not actually providing care while they're in the state care, and what are the outcomes and what are we trying to achieve? Because if, like you say, all these people who are in the prison systems were adopted or in state care, then there's got to be something wrong with the system, and we really need to address that. And I don't know, and although my best friend is a cop and I love her to bits and I want her to have a great career and be supported, I don't know that having tougher sentencing and what have you, and more cops on the beat, I don't know that that's how we're going to fix the prison problem as well.
No, well, prisons are a racial holding pattern, really. I think if you look at statistics in the States or in New Zealand with the amount of Māori Polynesian people in prison, I think if they were European, they wouldn't necessarily be there.
Yeah.
I think if they were European, they wouldn't have been pulled over in the first place. If they were European, they wouldn't have been pushed so hard that they reacted badly, maybe.
And what was it like, bringing it back to when you were in Wellington doing that that coffee blanket thing with the cardboard sign and all that, How did all those people feel? Obviously there were a lot of middle class New Zealand European people sitting there. Like, do you feel that they could understand what was actually happening for people who are homeless or low income? Because when you look on the street with people who are homeless, there's a lot of Māori and Pacifica overrepresented in that population of people.
Yeah, I think so. We. Apart from being by the main IRD building, we were also by McDonald's, and so Turtle had tapped into their free Wi-Fi and was posting constantly through the day photos of people. And the reason we found out the guy worked for IRD was because about an hour later, he wrote under a photo of himself, "Yeah, we all need some humanity," and said to his friends, "I suggest you come down and do this." So certainly it touched him. And it touched those people that, I remember a young couple like, "Oh, we've missed our train, but we just needed to go and get you some coffee." Yeah.
Through your work with, supporting other adults who've been through adoption and, state care and all that, what is it like for a lot of people? I mean, it probably doesn't happen for everyone, but what is it like for people when they do end up, say, meeting their biological family for the first time? Do people, sit around and kumbaya and, say, "Oh, yay, we finally reunited," or is it a bit more complex?
I think it's very different for everybody. I've got to put my hand up and say we haven't done that sort of support group and that for many years now. So, but adoption's always present in my head, I guess, because it's part of who I am. People talk about a honeymoon period, potentially. For me, I can only tell my own story, I guess. It was wonderfully grounding. When I first made contact with my birth mother, it was by phone. You could sort of I guess you had a choice really. You could either cold call once you tracked them down. I used electoral rolls to do that. Or this is all pre-internet, so you just, it's not David Lomas. It's, it's all pre that.
Didn't know you could do that.
Yeah, electoral rolls are all in the library. Well, their surname was a slightly different spelling of a regular name, which was handy, and they were from a small town where the family had remained, and so. Actually, when I think about it, what happened was I tracked who turned out to be my grandmother down first because my mother had married, so had got another second name. And so I rang my grandmother up, only time I've ever talked to her, and basically completely lied and said that my mother had gone to school with my birth mother and was back in town, or she was coming to town, and would love to get in touch with her. So have you got a number for her? Yeah. She's like, "Oh yeah, here's a number." And so I rang her up. Yeah, and that was special. Yeah, I rang her up, and the first thing she said was, "I'm sorry." So that was very special, and because and we talked really easily. And then after some time, we got to meet, and that was equally special. But in the end, she got to a point where she didn't feel like she could have time with me anymore. And I think that's because, I'm reflecting on that little baby wriggling around taken from the mother. Of course, that's a huge thing for a mum to have a child taken. And often that's a choice that hasn't really been theirs. Maybe now, I've got to say, adoption's changed a bit, but back in late 50s, early 60s. That was very much driven by parents that didn't want social shaming in their little communities. So you got women that are dealing with not only losing a child, but really having their own family pull the blanket out from under them. And I've met my birth father too. I think the reality is that your experience of being that child's father is probably, for some, as long as it takes to ejaculate. And that a woman has 9 months with you. So I did have 9 months with my mother. So sorry, that might sound a bit crude, but that's the reality. You know, some of those guys might not even know that someone was pregnant.
I think it's important to recognise the trauma that is, being adopted out, or willfully or not willfully being adopted out on, the child, but also on the parent as well. That must have been really, really, really hard for her as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and imagine. My birth mother was pretty typical of the age. I think she was 17, 15, 16, 17, those sorts of ages, those girls. Often from small towns, often got sent to Auckland and lived with a local doctor for a week or two, and were basically often stories where they were treated quite badly in terms of they got to do a lot of cleaning and stuff because they were seen as dirty girls. And again, that's that whole male-female thing. Women can become pregnant, men can do their thing.
See you later, bye-bye.
Yeah, see you later. And I think the thing too is that, I know people that are adopted that just don't want to find birth parents, and that's fine. That's their story. And I don't also want to negate the fabulous adoptive parents that are out there. And this is the trouble often that, as I say, I was always told I was adopted. I was always told those positive things. And for many people, I think they get stuck with feeling very torn between seeking their roots and not wanting to hurt the family they're from. So there's all that stuff too. But not all people were adopted by good people. And I know people that were adopted by monsters. And they were never checked up on.
That's a real shame on our country.
Yeah. But, yeah, it is. It was just, and I think it was a bit of a factory. There were so many of that cycle of young girls getting pregnant, no support within communities for young pregnancy, sent away. Plenty of people having troubles with infertility. There wasn't all the treatments for infertility now that there is now. And plenty of babies to be had. Now I think it's quite hard to find a child to adopt.
So where to from here? What's next for Give a Kid a Blanket? And, how can we make the world a better place?
Well, I think my thing is that we're running a race that we're never going to win. We're sort of dog paddling in the ocean, but we're keeping our head above it. And at least we're doing something. I think that in terms of Give a Kid a Blanket, our work is about getting community on board and as a community doing something that's quite immediate for that other part of our community. Often I will get schools and parents bringing kids in to donate. Schools are great to get on board because, of course, they can have a whole school thing. But sometimes I'll hear teachers or parents using it as a bit of a teaching for kids about, this is about how lucky you are. Look at these kids, they've got nothing, But look how lucky you are. And to me, that's not the approach. My message to those kids is how lucky you are to be part of a community that's loving and giving and could well be there for you when you need help. Because one day we might all need that help with dignity. I talked at a private preschool in Takapuna, and the lady said, "Oh, can you tell these kids where the blankets are going to go?" And these were 3-year-olds, so, you don't want to give them too dark a pitch. So I said to them, "Oh, how many of you guys got brothers and sisters?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah, I had brothers and sisters." I said, "Well, how many of you like to get in bed and sleep with your brothers and sisters at night?" Oh, none of them did that. They all had their own beds. So I said, "Well, the kids we give blankets to, because it's very common that we'll have 3 kids in a queen-size bed rather than every individual kid having a single. They like to sleep with your brother and sister because it keeps them warm." And there was sort of a deathly silence for a minute, and then this little fella at the back went, "My mum and dad sleep together." And then they suddenly, all these arms were shooting up, and they all had mums and dads, or mums and mums, or an Uncle Harry on Thursday that was cold, or they were all sleeping together. But what I loved was I just knew that night those kids were going to go home and say, "Are you cold?" Because that's all they saw. That sort of purity. And for us, I feel like in the community, there's always the finger pointers. They're pointing at the parents and go, it's the parents, and they're pointing at the politicians. No matter who's in power, they'll be blaming the politicians. My thing is we're pointing too, but what we're doing is we're pointing at ourselves and saying we can do something. Can't change the world, can't win the wars, can't stop famine, but I know, and in terms of, say, doctoring, health-wise, there is a number of families that will not be coming to see Nina because suddenly they're having warmth, pyjamas, good night's sleep, and we've stopped it there. It's the fence at the top rather than the ambulance at the bottom. And sometimes it's something as simple as that. Now, that's not me saying it, even though I'm saying it here. That's anecdotally back from those professionals, because while the people we help do remain anonymous to us, that anecdotal feedback comes back, and it is changing people's lives, just in a little small way.
Sounds like incredible work, and sounds like very hard work.
It's hard work. It's very rewarding work. But it is what it is.
And how can people help with Give a Kid a Blanket?
Great question. I was hoping you were going to say that. No, long. If they're in Auckland, how we work is in winter we work Auckland-wide with a number of organisations, and out of winter we focus on the west with the police and the public health nurses, and who else we got there? Family Action, they're a refuge counselling service, Māori Women's Refuge, Plunkett, I Tepuere, they look after young parents. Pillars, they look after kids whose parent or parents are in prison, so we look after that. And they keep us busy all the time. And how you can help is either you could look us up, Give a Kid a Blanket is our very nice website. Lots of information there of places you could actually take excellent quality donations to. Or you could make a financial donation, very helpful. I think where I was heading before when we were talking about winter was that we had to buy a lot more things this winter because some forever chasing grants, but that's very time consuming. Or they could just look, I say to people, buildings a brick at a time. So even if you've got nothing, just tell somebody about it. That's follow us on Facebook, and we're trying to build that Instagram page up. Get on to those young people.
Yep. So I'm going to just enough time for one last question. So what is the most influential piece of art that you've ever seen?
Okay. I've seen some cool things, but when I was a kid, there was a Van Gogh exhibition at the Auckland City Art Gallery. I think I was 11. And my mother took me to that, and it just blew me away. I'll always remember that. So there were a number of paintings, and they were all fantastic. But there was this painting of these boots, and they were very moving. So I've seen heaps as an adult, and heaps that I'm far more informed about, and heaps by friends that are artists, but it was great at such a young age to recognise something so fabulous that I realised now that the world recognises, but at the time they were just paintings.
What was special about these boots?
They were just sort of punched out in paint, really. I know what it was. You could feel where the artist was. Yeah, you could feel where his hand had been and pushed paint around with that brush. Magnificent. I mean, if I go to shows, especially painting shows, I like to get not really close to a painting. I like to go and stand where the painter would have stood. There's always great stuff about standing back, but go and stand where the painter was, because that's where they've been working.
The individual brush strokes.
Yeah, just being there, suddenly seeing it just in front of you. Not the whole work, maybe, if it's a big work, but just those bits and just, yeah. Guess it's like our art. You go and stand in the shoes for a split second.
Thank you so much for coming on Revolving Door Syndrome, Bernie.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thanks.
Revolving Door Syndrome acknowledges Māori as tangata whenua and Te Tiriti o Waitangi partners in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We recognise the inequities and challenges faced by Indigenous and vulnerable groups and acknowledge our duty to work towards closing the gap.